like to hear back or not.
We're just waiting on the stream to get started.
I have no idea how that happened, Laura.
Oh, I like it.
Okay, Madam Chair, we're ready to proceed.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, I would like to call this February 17th work session of the Port Commerce Advisory Board to order. So we have two things on the schedule for today. We're going to be talking about energy education and the resources available to us. We have some of those from the Renewal Energy Alaska project, or perhaps they're going to tell me they're from somewhere else. I know that, okay, go, I'm getting the thumbs up. And then we're also going to be talking about the SMIC overlay. This is, as you guys know, we have it on our agenda to meet with the planning and zoning to talk about this, but the community development director asked if she could join us for a work session before that so that we could talk about the things that are on the board's mind with regards to SMIC, and so that we can come into that work session a bit more prepared with having done a little bit more of our homework. So we're going to start with the presentation from REAP. So I would like to turn it over to Colleen Fisk.
I think Chris is going to take it over. I'm here to support, but Chris, I think, has a presentation put together.
Well, Colleen, thank you so much for joining us today. Chris, I will turn it over to you.
You're muted, Chris.
I think Karen has my presentation and was going to advance some slides for me.
I will do that.
So, first of all, thanks a lot for requesting that we come and talk to you today. I want to say that from our perspective, energy is everything, so it's hard to fit in everything you might want to hear about in a short presentation, but I'm going to try to hit a large swath of what we do. We'll be glad to have Colleen here to answer other questions about some of our STEM education work that we do around the state. But what I'm going to do is try to give a broad overview of some of the things that are going on, just so the advisory board is aware of some of the issues and some of the things that we're working on. First slide, please, after the title slide. Just so you know a little bit about REAP, can you guys see that? Founded in 2004? Is that what you're looking at? Okay. We're a nonprofit that was founded back in 2004, and we're a diverse group of stakeholders. So everyone who may have an interest in renewable energy and energy efficiency across the state. Our mission is to increase the development of renewable energy in Alaska and also to promote energy efficiency. We do that through a variety of means: education, advocacy, collaboration, and training. At one point or another, I know the City of Seward has been a member of REAP. I'm not certain actually today whether you're a member or not, but we've really appreciated the city's support. The next one, please. A lot of what we do is education, and Colleen's our education director. We actually have 3 STEM educators on staff, and we've helped develop with the university some energy efficiency curriculum called AK Energy Smart. For the Department of Energy, we also disseminate a Win for Schools curriculum. So these are both STEM curriculums: science, technology, engineering, and math. And we just feel like energy literacy is super important for our future. We want people to understand where energy comes from and what all the implications of their energy decisions are. And we really feel like it flows into the need for workforce development and training when it comes to clean energy. As you'll see from my presentation, we feel like the whole world is kind of shifting toward clean energy, but we don't necessarily have all the people in place right now to operate, maintain, and optimize those kinds of projects into the future. We started our own initiative a few years back called ANNE, the Alaska Network for Energy Education and Employment. So we have another staff person who focuses just on that. We also work on various statewide and regional efforts around the state to educate the public as well as school children. Next, please. A lot of the work we've done is advocacy. We helped develop a bill back in 2008 and then got it passed called the Renewal Energy Fund. Many of you are familiar with the Renewal Energy Fund. The state's put more than $270 million into it. That's leveraged another $300 million or so from federal and private sources. So we have now become the world leader in renewable microgrids, in large part because we had that fund established 13 years ago now. Excuse me. We've also been a primary advocate of all the funding that came out through the HFC weatherization and rebate programs. So over $640 million went into those programs. Those were all grants. It was fantastic. We were really excited about all that. The average savings, as you'll see in a second, has been tremendous. And really that's what we want to focus a lot on, is energy efficiency. We've also worked on grid reform, passing Senate Bill 123 last spring, and we're currently working on a bill to create a green bank, which I'll talk about in a second. Next, please. So we have calculated back in the envelope that Alaskans are spending $5 billion a year on energy. $5 billion a year on energy. So that's collectively, that's all of us. That's not including the North Slope. That's just, the people who live here. And that's for electricity, heating, and transportation. Most of that money is leaving our economy. So from a purely economic point of view, we see that $5 billion is a big number. We estimate the state alone is paying 1/10 of that for state buildings and utility bills. So there's a lot of money to be made if we can save on the front end by just not burning fuel that's being used wastefully. The next slide, please. We've created a little logo here for that, called Alaska's $1 billion bonfire, because we estimate conservatively that we could save 20% of that $5 billion. If we employed what we know are known technologies, we could save 1/5 of that $5 billion every year as a state. That's $1 billion. So in other words, we're throwing $1 billion away in the bonfire every year. And our goal is to figure out how we can displace a lot of that. Next, please. Mentioned the weatherization rebate programs. Over 50,000 homes were weatherized. We just believe this is the place to start. Our building stock in the state of Alaska is not the greatest. It's not the newest. It's not the most energy efficient. It's not that interesting to some people to talk about building energy efficiency, but there's a lot of jobs there. There's a lot of money to be saved there. It's really where we have to start. The 50,000 homes that have collectively been, on average, saving 30% a year after their retrofits, by HFC's estimates, are saving over 25 million gallons of diesel every year, diesel equivalent in heating oil. Next, please. This just shows what can be done. This is a model home built by the Cold Climate Housing Research Center, which is based in Fairbanks and now actually has become a part of the National Laboratory System. They're part of the National Renewal Energy Laboratory now. But they built this home out in Quinnahock, where the average house uses 1,000 gallons of heating oil a year. This home, which was built for about the same amount per square foot, uses 180 gallons of heating oil a year. So tremendous savings. This is through new construction. Next, please. The Renewal Energy Fund, as I mentioned, has supported over 80 projects now, mostly in rural Alaska. Those projects are, again, collectively saving about 30 million gallons of diesel every year. So there's a real economic component to what we're talking about here. There's a lot of money to be saved if we're not wasting the fossil fuels that we're importing. And we're working now to figure out a way to do that, because the way we look at clean energy is really in 4 buckets. There's technology, which I'll talk a little bit about, but we don't claim to be experts in. We're not engineers on the REAP staff, but we can translate technology for policymakers like yourself and others who want to learn more about technology. We keep up on the latest technology, but we're not engineers. The second bucket is money. That's what I'm about to talk about. You can have the best technology in the world, and if you can't afford it, and you can't get a grant for it, which is increasingly true in the state of Alaska, then how are you going to pay for it? Third bucket, which we concentrate a lot on, is people. If you don't have people to maintain and operate your systems, then you're not going to be able to get the best bang for your buck. And actually, you could give the technology a bad name because people might think it's failing because of the technology rather than just a lack of maintenance. And Avtech there in Seward has been a great partner for us to work on training and education. I want to give a plug to those guys. They've really been an excellent partner over the years. And the fourth bucket is simply policy. That kind of weaves all this together. and I'll mention a little bit about the policy we've already worked on. So next, please. I want to talk a little bit about why private financing is not available right now. So in other words, or not affordably available. If you wanted to put $10,000 or $15,000 into your home now, rather than getting a grant from HFC, which no longer exists, but you wanted to put $15,000 into your home to make it more weather tight, maybe put a new boiler in, and so on, you could go to your credit union or your bank, but it's probably not going to be the best deal. It's probably not going to be packaged so that you can have a cash flow positive loan. It's probably going to be a loan, in the 8 to 10% range. Maybe you can get down to 7, and you're probably going to have 5 to 10 years to pay it back. So that is a problem. And right now, if we don't have banks that are willing to do something different, then it's going to be hard for people to get the financing. But there's a short track record for this clean energy financing. And the analogy that I would give is that you couldn't get a bank loan for a car the day after cars were invented. You just couldn't. I mean, banks had to understand the risk associated with cars and homes before they started offering mortgages and auto loans. From the bank's perspective, too, these projects are really distributed. They're small. They're not aggregated. It's kind of not worth their time. There's no secondary market. There's no market liquidity. There's no way for them to sell those loans off. You take out an auto loan or a mortgage, it's no surprise when you get a letter that says your loan's been sold to somebody else. Well, that's not happening yet in the clean energy space. And it's just human organizational behavior. I mean, people are slow to change. Next, please. So green banks are something that we're working on, the people around the state are working on, the states, I should say, and the federal government's working on. And these are quasi-governmental entities typically that work on commercial technologies, but they de-risk these loans so that the private capital, the banks that are not participating yet, will come in and we can leverage that private investment. And that has really been working in states like Connecticut, New York, and others where they've established green banks. I'm just going to, in the next slide, please, give you one example. In Connecticut, where they have a green bank, the first green bank in the States, you can get a Smart E-loan, which is what this slide talks about, for up to $40,000 online from the Connecticut Green Bank, unsecured. So you can get up to a $40,000 unsecured loan through the Connecticut Green Bank to do the kinds of things that I think you guys are all interested in people who are doing, making their homes more efficient and doing other things like that. It's hard to do that if you don't have the money. Next, please. So what does climate change have to do with the electric grid? And I guess I put that up there just to be a little provocative and to get people thinking about what's really going on here. 25% of emissions worldwide come from the electric sector, but it's actually the biggest potential growth sector if you think about it, because we're moving to electric transportation, we're moving to electric heat with things like air source heat pumps, and we need a grid that's going to prepare us for that. We need a grid that's going to be flexible, we need a grid that's really anticipating a lot more renewable energy coming online, and we need a grid that's going to be thinking about things like, how are we going to service a lot of people who want to plug in their cars or want to use electric heat. These are things that we're hoping that our grid will start to prepare for. Next, please. So we've been working over the last few years on the rail belt grid reform, and the city steward's right there in the middle of it with us. Before Senate Bill 123 was passed about a year ago, these were the problems. We had no big load balancing area. In other words, all 6 utilities, at the time 6 utilities, were doing supply and demand balancing on their own. And to some extent, that's still happening. That's kind of a problem for renewable energy, because the bigger the grid that you've got, the easier it is to put a variable electron like a solar or wind electron into that grid. There was no regional planning. There's still no regional planning, but Senate Bill 123 mandates there will be regional planning, so that from Fairbanks to Homer, there'll be a plan together. That's important because if you were to combine all utilities in the rail belt, the average annual load of those utilities equals about half of one power plant. So, in the lower 48. So, half of a power plant in the lower 48 is about 500 megawatts. Our average annual load for the entire rail belt is 650. So, it's inefficient in a lot of ways to begin with, but it becomes more inefficient when you've got 5 or 6 entities that are running it. So what Senate Bill 123 did was create an electric reliability organization, or mandate that one be created, so we can do things like regional planning, and we can have regional reliability standards and regional interconnection standards, and hopefully a regional transmission tariff. Those are some of the problems we're solving. Next, please. Senate Bill 123 really culminated more than 30 years of previous reform efforts. I'm not going to read through all those, but you can see these are all serious efforts that occurred in the legislature and other places trying to reform the grid, because people have known for a long time that it didn't make any sense for us to be running the grid the way we were. Next, please. This is a great photo that a former MEA general manager back in the 80s, who's pictured here, sent me. He had it in his newspaper clippings. This was back in 1984. It was the Anchorage Times, and he sent this to me the day after Senate Bill 123 was passed, saying, "We thought we had this whipped in 1984, and then it took another 35 years or so for it to actually happen." But I guess that points out just how significant this railroad grid reform that's going on really is. Next slide. Senate Bill 123 precipitated an effort by the Regulatory Commission to implement it through regulations. So this gives you kind of a timeline of what's going on right now. In the summer of 2020, the RCA opened up some dockets to make the rules that will implement that law. And an entity called the Railroad Reliability Council, which the city of Seward is part of, began forming. I'm also a representative on the RRC. We meet every Monday for 3 or 4 hours, and we meet multiple times during the week in subcommittees. And what we're doing is working on bylaws and articles of incorporation for this thing called the Railroad Reliability Council, because in October, after the regulations are finalized by the RCA in July, the RRC will apply to the RCA to become the electric reliability organization for the whole rail belt. And that's going to be important, because once we have that platform, we'll be able to deal with a lot of the problems and issues that I'm going to talk about in a second, and that maybe questions that you folks have. Next, please. One of the reasons the REAP has been interested in railroad reform is we just believe it's risk management. We certainly want to see more renewable energy in our grid, but some of these risks are apparent already today, and I'm going to run through them really quick. First of all, there's fuel price volatility, climate risk, technology innovation, customer needs, and resiliency. So, next, please. Fuel price volatility is an issue. More than 80% of the grid in the rail belt is fueled by natural gas. That's an issue because, number one, we've got kind of all our eggs in one basket. It's also an issue because we now have virtual monopoly control over Cook Inlet gas. Hilcorp controls about 90% of all the gas we use. There's also flat demand in the rail belt, and it's a small market to begin with. The only reason that it has actually been able to kind of continue is the states put over $1 billion of subsidies in it to incentivize exploration and production in Cook Inlet. So we've got a lot of state subsidies for natural gas that are kind of unsustainable now. Bottom line, though, is the utilities in the rail belt are paying 3 times what the lower 48 utilities pay for natural gas. So even though we are producing gas in Cook Inlet right at our doorstep, we're paying 3 times what the Henry Hub price is in the lower 48. So it's a problem for us to have all our eggs in this basket. Next, please. Climate risk. I'm not going to go over this too much, but to point out that it's likely that we are going to have some kind of carbon pricing in the near future, in the relatively near future. This is just a quote from a letter from the oil companies 6 years ago saying we would like to have certainty. We would like to have a price on carbon. This is the oil companies 6 years ago. We're clearly going to see something like this, and that's going to raise the price further of using fossil fuels. Next, please. This just shows you which countries and subnational governments, like states, already have a price on carbon. It's happening already. It's likely to be happening in the future even more. Next, please. This is probably the biggest thing, and I'm not going to spend the requisite time on it probably, but technology innovation is just a big deal. It's happening very quickly. It's happening on a purely economic basis for the most part, and it's really gonna change our world. Electric transportation is just one element of that. I'll talk about that more in a second, but you probably already all heard recently that General Motors announced that it's going to be phasing out of internal combustion engines completely. And Volvo already did that, and other car companies are doing that. And some people believe that we may not see any more internal combustion engines sold after 2035 anywhere on the planet. And that means all those cars are going to be fueled by electricity. That's going to be an important development, and it's going to affect all of us. I mentioned electric heating. Energy storage is a big development because its price is coming down almost as quickly as solar and wind. And there are many, many other technology innovations that are going to keep changing the world we live in. Next, please, just to give you some example, over the last decade, the price of solar has come down 89%. So even those of us who are in this business of translating what's going on have trouble keeping up with how quickly things are changing. The price of wind in the last decade has come down 70%. Today, on this planet, the cheapest electricity is solar already. It's the cheapest electricity on planet Earth now is solar in most jurisdictions. Already happened. Wind is already cheaper than natural gas and coal in most jurisdictions. It's not happening in the railroad yet. I'm happy to answer questions why, but it hasn't happened here. Next slide, please. This is a chart that just shows you a comparison of the unsubsidized cost of power of different technologies. And you can see that there's conventional and alternative technologies where solar is the cheapest. So this is done by Lazard every year. They are an international consulting firm. They do this analysis and cost comparison every single year. Now, you can see now that solar is the cheapest electricity on the planet. Next, please. This is just another way of looking at it. This is the cost curve for solar over the last 10 years or so. And the price is the red line, and the amount of installation is the yellow bars. Next, please. Same kind of graph. Price of wind, onshore wind, coming down. It's flattening out, but it's still going down. And then the amount of wind installed across the United States in the blue bars. Next, please. This is just a screenshot of a video that I watched this morning, and I wanted to share it with you because it shows that in the last several years, the price of batteries has come down 87%. And it's going to go down another 80% over the next several years. So this is a game changer. This is a game changer for the entire electric industry. If you can use energy storage like batteries to smooth out the effect of wind and solar, the other kinds of technologies are basically going to become obsolescent. They're going to be gone. Next, please. We'll pass through this. The customer needs and desires are changing, and this is also changing the market. I think we're on almost half of the Fortune 500 slide now, but this just shows that the big companies on the planet are doing this regardless of what's going on with government. Of the Fortune 100, the largest companies in the index, 63%. This is a couple of years ago, 2017. 4 years ago, 63% of the Fortune 100 had a goal of clean energy, some kind of goal of clean energy. And many of those, like Google and Amazon, they have 100% clean energy goals. Next, please. This is a graph that is important for the city of Seward and other places in the rail belt, but this shows the amount of net metering capacity that's been installed in the rail belt since 2010. Net metering is an ability for a customer to sell excess electricity that they might produce from a solar panel on their roof back into the grid. And I know this has been an issue in the city of Seward. It's something that the other railroad utilities have been doing. And you can see as the price of solar has come down, primarily solar, over the last 10 years or so, the amount of people who are actually putting solar on their homes and then getting paid back by their local utility is rising sharply. And it can continue to rise sharply because people are making economic decisions for themselves. These are decisions that governments don't make. These are decisions that markets and consumers make. Next, please. This is a similar graph just showing the share of electric vehicle sales in different places around the world. Again, the trajectory of this graph is what's important. You can see that all over the world, and particularly in China, the red at the bottom, EVs are increasingly the share, increasing their shares of the total vehicle market quite quickly. Next, please. Grid resiliency and security. We've heard a lot about that over the last couple of days with this big winter storm down in the lower 48. In particular, a lot of questions about the resiliency of the grid in Texas, where there's still 3 or 4 million people without power today. I just talked to some folks down there. This is important. This is one of the reasons we wanted our own grid to reform. We need regional reliability standards. We need regional cybersecurity standards. These are all things that the new electric reliability organization is going to bring. And this slide, I think, says a lot about where REAP is coming from. This is from a executive from Xcel Energy, one of the biggest independent power producers in the lower 48, a huge energy company. This is him testifying, talking I think he said the same thing in congressional testimony, but this is him in Climate Wire 4 years ago saying, so when the utilities pool the generation assets and dispatch them together, then you get greater efficiency and flexibility. That's what we're trying to do. Those two things will contribute to more renewable integration. So by getting all the utilities together, including the city of Seward's utilities, we're hoping that we're going to have more opportunities to put more renewable energy in. Next slide. I put this slide in for a couple reasons. The sky's the limit. You know, it's an English idiom. For most people, it means there's no end to the possibilities. In a lot of ways, that's my message, is that there's no end to the possibilities. I think Alaska, REAP thinks Alaska can and should be the most energy efficient place on the planet. We also think we can be a world leader in some of these integration strategies. We're already leading that in the small villages. There's no reason why we can't be a leader on this bigger grid. But there's another way to look at this slide. You can see the aurora, which is typically about 80 miles above the ground. It kind of helps define where the horizon is, or excuse me, where the end of the atmosphere is. You know, astronomers define the end of our atmosphere as 100 kilometers up. That's 62 miles away. So that means our atmosphere is a very, very tiny place, only 62 miles up. And that's the atmosphere that we have to protect. It's a very fragile place, and it's definitely changing right now. The chemical composition of it is changing with the fuels that we're burning. So that is why I think policy changes are going to continue to promote more renewable energy, as well as the fact that it's now the cheapest energy on the planet. So next slide. And I think this is my last slide, and I know I've been talking fast, but I want to have some time for Q&A. We have some policy challenges ahead of us. We have to make energy efficiency our first objective. We have to create binding policy in the state because we don't have any. We have some programs, they're great. We don't have any binding policy. Despite being an energy state that has made a lot of money off of developing oil and gas, we have no policy really that protects consumers of how we're going to get affordable energy into the future. We also need to really focus on these public-private partnerships, like the green bank I was talking about before. I could give a whole presentation just on green banks, but it is a public-private partnership. And we need to invest in education and workforce development. That's why Colleen and the other folks at REAP spend so much time in the schools, in the training centers, working with vocational centers so that we have people prepared for what's coming. And we also need to align the programs and the subsidies we have right now, so they're all kind of focused in the same area. So that's a big, fast overview of a lot of stuff that's going on, but I thought it would be a good place to start. I'm not sure where your conversation is going, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks again for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will try to get in a view where I can see everyone here so that I can see where there are hands. Okay, perfect. Yeah, if there's anyone with questions, feel free. Bruce. Oh, you're still muted. There you go.
Oh, I'm out. Okay. Well, I think this is an excellent presentation. I was sitting here waiting for opportunities to find gotchas that I could, sort of drop a hammer on, because I do know a little bit about most of these topics that were talked about, as a lot of us do. One of the things that occurs to me in the early part of the presentation was how to bring groups together, how to present the problem and the goals. I'm part of the climate action group because I think it's an important thing that we do for our immediate well-being and long-term well-being, and how we get mass support, I think, is critical to that effort. And I just wonder if there's not so many organizations that you're splintering the effort to draw people in. I get a lot of people on my Facebook page, my very, very conservative friends, who are naysayers in wind and the carbon footprints of wind, et cetera, which I think is a lack of true information. But they point to small little snippets, and it's easy to take something out of context that way. So with all these different groups, including ours, Laura, on PACAB we have, 5 different subgroups now working on climate action. How do we actually form a coherent face to this thing?
I think that's a great question, Bruce. And it's not just Alaskans who are struggling with that. There are a lot of groups working in these areas. REAP's focus has been the solution, which we think is less emissions through different technologies. And so we've been kind of focused on that aspect. We're not necessarily a climate group per se, although clearly that would be one of the impacts of having more renewable energy is to have less emissions. We believe, again, that getting into the schools and getting people a solid foundation in the sciences and technology and math when they're young is super important, because I think people are less susceptible to misinformation when they get older. If they have a solid a grounding in science and math, they become better critical thinkers. They understand what is going to be happening. There are all kinds of different groups that have been trying to coalesce around climate. There's the Alaska Climate Alliance that's just recently formed. But REAP has really been the entity that's been trying to integrate all of the diverse stakeholders on electricity and heat and transportation. So our goal has simply be to bring different stakeholders as members of our group in so we can have those conversations. So we have different public policy committees. We have different committees that work on these issues at REAP, and then we bring those issues to policymakers and Juneau typically and say, look, we think we have consensus on this idea or that idea. And that's how we've been able to successfully get legislation passed in Juneau over the last 17 years. But it's a great question. I can't really give you a great answer other than I think there's a lot of people trying to coalesce around these issues.
A follow-up, Laura? I think you're correct. Getting to the kids, getting to fertile minds, if you will, early, and at least plant a seed. Some of us, my era, my generation, are resistant to this a little bit. But I would ask, when I look at an organization, I often look at how they're funded. How they're funded has a great deal to do with who's supporting them. And often when people look at that, they'll say, well, this group is I can accept this group because they're supported by someone that I don't think is a terrible person. So can you simply say where you get your funding?
Yeah, almost 50% of our funding comes from the Navy, the Office of Naval Research. The Office of Naval Research cares about STEM education because they want kids to come out of high school who can run nuclear submarines. And they care about climate change because they know climate change is the biggest risk multiplier on the planet for the military. And so they give us about half of our funding right now to support STEM education. We also get funding through national laboratories, through the Alaska Energy Authority, through the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, so state and federal agencies. About 20% of our budget comes from our members and individual donors, and about 15% comes from philanthropic foundations.
Thank you. Remember, Kat, I see your hand raised there.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much. The only thing I just have a simple question. I get a little lost in the alphabet soup. What is ERO? On the slide, SB 123 and RCA, you've got RCA invites ERO applications. I'm sorry, what is that?
Well, don't be sorry. We get used to speaking these acronyms because it saves us a few syllables, you know. But the Electric Reliability Organization is the ERO, and so that is a type of entity. It's a generic type of entity. For instance, there are other generic entities around the country called ISOs, which are independent system operators, or RTOs, which are regional transmission organizations. We didn't get an organization that's an ISO and RTO, we got a reliability organization. And the RRC, which is another acronym for the Railroad Reliability Council, is the group that the City of Seward and REEF are both part of that is working to become an applicant to become that ERO for the railroad.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Well,
Are there any other questions or comments from the board?
Is my audio working there? Yeah.
yeah.
Hi, sorry I was a few minutes late, good old technology issues. Good to see you, Chris and Colleen, and thank you for the presentation. I guess to go back to Bruce's point there, I think that your webpage, your AlaskaRenewableEnergy.org, has the member list I'm looking at right now, and you have the businesses, the education, local NGOs, and then at the bottom there's the utility list. And most utilities are on there that are railboat utilities with a few others, and I'd like to see Seward's name on there. But that said, I think as far as getting Alaskan specific needs addressed, how could your organization help Seward kind of move out of this rut we were in for a while with renewables, and we're really playing catch up.
Sure.
So we're trying to work on education. We're talking about ways outreach for to outreach to the community members, and the possibility of an energy fair. But we're playing catch up, and I'd like to hear how REEF could help with that.
Well, certainly we can come to the school. We can work, the work that Colleen does, and I know she's been to Seward before, but maybe not recently. We're always happy and willing to work with AppTech, obviously. There was a solicitation that just closed yesterday, but will open up again, for a new program that REEF is a partner for, called the Energy Transition Initiative Partnership Program, ETIP, I-T-I-P-P, or excuse me, E-T-I-P-P. That's a Department of Energy program that actually REEF has spent a lot of time trying to get developed over at DOE in DC. And that money, the DOE has now given money to the national labs, who've then subcontracted to regional partners around the country, including REEF and the Alaska Center for Energy and Power here in Alaska. And what that ETIP program is doing is offering technical assistance from a consortium of national laboratories to communities, and Seward would qualify, to communities that want to do an energy transition. So that whole program is set up for a local organization like REEF to be the liaison between a community and the National Renewable Energy Lab, the Sandia National Lab, the Berkeley National Lab, and the Pacific Northwest National Lab. So we have now a conduit to those national laboratories with incredible expertise, and that these technology or these technical assistance grants are going to happen about every 12 to 18 months. The first round of applications just ended yesterday, but that means that probably another 12 to 18 months will come around. And certainly be happy to be more in touch with you folks on how to get an application in. That's one form of technical assistance that we definitely can offer. And in another conversation, maybe we could brainstorm some others.
I'd like to jump in. I emailed you, Ben, during this meeting, the different educational offerings that we have from REAP. So, I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that, but I think you guys have someone else who wants to talk too. But that can give you an idea of some of our education work. City of Seward has partnered and been a partnership with us on something called the Power Pledge Challenge, which you've supported the last, I think, 2 or 3 years. That the City of Seward has supported, and so I've traveled down to Seward as part of that, and looking forward to continue that, especially when we can be in person again.
Thank you for that, Colleen. And I appreciate the board membership to put forward on all those educational opportunities stuff, so the board has that as the laydown for the meeting. And it's so cool to see that you have so many different programs for all ages. And just, since we're speaking to you directly, how long has it been in the Seward schools? And I guess, is your curriculum something that is, kind of K through 12 that is supposed to, be with the kids as they go through the entire school system? And is that something that can kind of be set up so that it's recurring and you don't have to come back, but it's self-sustaining?
Yeah, so good question. I was there last I want to say fall of 2019. I was supposed to go down again, obviously fall of 2020, which is when we do the Power Pledge Challenge initiative, that didn't happen. So I was last there in person then. And the curriculum is set up where it can be integrated throughout the school so that they build on each other and have similar concepts that can build on each other. And the teachers, obviously it's dependent on the teachers being able to use and integrate it into their classroom and what time that they have, but that is something that can build on it and doesn't need me there, although I love doing presentations in classroom. I love Seward, so I'm always happy to visit.
Board Member Hughes, I think you had your hand up first.
Yes, Chris, thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent. I appreciate it a lot. I think I take out of this whole presentation that the most important word in all of it, including your acronyms, is the word reliability. We do need a reliable grid that's easy to maintain, operate, and share, and I'll be able also to contribute the renewable resource or energies to that grid. So again, I do thank you for your presentation. It's very informative.
Thanks.
Board Member Johnson?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to circle back to one of the things, and the Board Member Hughes is correct. The grid is tremendously important to us, and I've been a participant in helping that grid stay alive for 30 years. And 30 years ago, when Bud Schultz was the CEO of Chugach, and Chugach was the major domo of all state energy, and all the energy came through Chugach. We had reliability. It really wasn't terrible. The system has grown, and the managers of the utility of the grid have grown with it. So they don't do a terrible job. That's not to say there's not improvement. I certainly heard the concept of saving 1/5 of the energy cost of the state, and some of that can be done with improvements in the grid and the management of the grid, which would be fair. Just that on the table, but my real question would be, in energy, as we're moving forward with alternatives, renewables, a change from fossil fuel, there are two major impacts. One, of course, is how we're going to address, how we're going to improve climate That's a climate action portion. But the other is, how are we going to mitigate the impact of the change? Employment, I have looked through this, and I cannot see that employment in the renewable field comes anywhere close to the employment with fossil energy. Now, that may be good. We may have to retrain all those roughnecks to do something, and myself to do something else, but how do we face that? Because that's a big blowback when people look and say, well, we're going to go wind, and I'm trained on diesel fuel. How do we address that?
Well, it's a great question. There's a whole movement you may have heard of called Just Transition. And Just Transition is all about making the transition that's inevitable a just one, so that people don't lose their jobs, they can be retrained. I'll give you one example of, I think, an area that is undervalued right now. We don't have enough jobs in. That's a whole new area of employment, and that is energy management. The person who runs ANI for us, the Alaska Network for Energy Education and Employment, has identified multiple opportunities across Alaska where a person if a person was hired to just manage the energy of a community's buildings, or maybe even just a school's buildings, that person would probably save their employer way more than their $100,000 a year salary, just in energy savings. So look at that $1 billion that I mentioned for Alaska. If we could save 20% of the money we're spending on energy right now, that money can go towards some of these things we're talking about, like retraining in new fields like energy management. So I think we have to be a little bit creative, and we also have to be realistic about where the jobs actually are. And right now, we need a lot more jobs in energy efficiency and energy management, and we just don't think of it as a field. So that's one example of, I think, a new field. Batteries is going to be a brand new field. Now, whether or not that employs as many people as other technologies have, I don't know. But clearly, over the years, there's been many, many transitions. I mean, over history, let's just say even over centuries, there's been transitions. And in this one, we've got the communications capability, and I think the financial capability to kind of foresee what's happening, like you said, and plan for it. So that's one of the reasons why we set up this ANI initiative a few years ago.
Hey, Laura, can I ask a couple questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, this is Steven, so I'm the Assistant City Manager here in Seward. I've got one high-level question for you and one kind of niche. I'll start with the niche. So the last slide you had up was kind of speaking to wind energy, and I guess one of the, kind of back to what Bruce was saying earlier, one of the primary things that I hear from some naysayers specifically about wind is, especially in Alaska, is regarding the detrimental effects that it might have on migratory waterfowl, ducks, geese, cranes, etc. And so I'm curious how you speak to that when that gets brought up. And then you had mentioned earlier in your presentation, which again, to reiterate what everybody said, I thought was fabulous. I'd be interested to hear what your perspective is on what barriers we do have to making solar more prevalent in the rail belt. So those are the questions I have. Thank you.
Well, great questions, and of course I get that wind question with birds all the time. The Fish and Wildlife Service, so the National Fish and Wildlife Service, is not going to allow any major wind project without consultation. So if you are a wind developer worth your salt, you go to Fish and Wildlife before you do anything to figure out where you're putting, where you want to put this wind farm is going to have an impact. We have a tremendous memory of what happened with some of the first really small wind turbines in places like Altamont, California, where they didn't understand that they were going to be that they were putting them up right along these ridges where all the raptors would fly. And of course, those are much smaller, faster turbines. These was like 40 years ago when the turbines were, 100 feet tall and spun really fast like a propeller blade. Now, as you know, the big wind turbines are, 300 feet tall and they move slower. But the big issue is that the Fish and Wildlife and other biologists have figured out how to alleviate the concerns that people have, not 100%, but have really been able to minimize the amount of birds that get killed. And I'll leave it with a statistic. It's estimated that about 50,000 birds a year are indeed killed by wind turbines, but 80 million birds a year are killed by cats. So, we don't mitigate everything. So that's kind of, that's every action by humans does have some impact. As far as the solar goes, I don't know if the city of Seward itself is net metering. I know that there has been talk about that before. I think it's the only railroad utility that's not net metering, but that might be a place for you folks to continue to think about starting, is how you could start integrating solar right there in your community. The solar farms that are now being built in the interior, or, well, I shouldn't say the interior, south of the range, but, in Matanuska Electric Association territory, MEA, are now utility-scale solar farms. So the first utility-scale solar farm, a megawatt-plus solar farm, was built and is selling power to the Matanuska Electric Association at the cost of MEA's power. So or generating power, not their power with fuel, but just the cost of their avoided cost of fuel and O&M. So, in other words, right now, we're already seeing that commercial scale solar is competitive in the rail belt already. That same developer is working on some other other solar farms that they want to sell the power from to MEA. So it's happening. I mean, and this is simply because of the price, right? I mean, the price has come down so quickly over the last decade. One of the analogies I like to give is this. People used to say, well, it's dark here 4 months a year. To go, yeah, okay, it's dark 4 months a year, but you park your car 95% of the time. You still buy a car. So if you can get, if the appliance, i.e. the solar panel, is cheap enough, even if you only get production out of it 66% of the year, you're going to buy it. And that's what's happening. And the price of solar is expected to go down another 70% over the next decade. So it's going to get so low that everyone's going to want to put solar on, and even in cloudy climates, even in places that don't have as good a sun, let's say, as others. But that's one of the things we have to be ready for. We have to figure out how are we going to be ready for that. The barriers have been mostly interconnection agreements. That's why this electric reliability organization is creating a regional set of interconnection agreements, and hopefully a regional transmission tariff. We're not quite there. The legislation doesn't quite mandate that we get a regional transmission tariff, but I think everyone agrees we need to get there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Jaffa.
I unfortunately don't have access to my general laptop and tabletop that Ben was looking online. If you are representative of your organization, I'll say you're a tremendous resource. And my question would be, do you have a question and answer link on your website? Because there are a ton of little questions that come up all the time that one would be best to be able to find a good resource to quote or to brainstorm with.
That's a great question. We have a FAQ page, but we don't have like an open, ongoing question and answer forum, which is, it's not a bad idea. I'm not sure if we have the bandwidth to do it and to keep it up to date, but I'd be more than willing to take a call from anybody, anytime. And that's, that's what we do. I spend a significant chunk of my week on the phone with people who are calling me and just asking me questions. So do not hesitate.
Well, thank you, Chris. We really appreciate you being here. I just want to wrap up by kind of circling back to what the original topic for this work session was to talk about energy education for the community of Seward. And when the board has spoken about this previously, the things that were really important to us is that we found a way to make the delivery of that energy education equitable for the community. So finding a way, a method of delivery, especially in these times where the most people can benefit and take part in whatever offerings we have. And I think that we came to the determination that some sort of an online space was probably the best for that. But in listening to your presentation, you talked about the great payback on home energy efficiency. It was such a disappointment when that grant funding ran out for the energy efficiency program, because that was such a much loved program in the state. But I think that our conversations with the board have often gone back to that. When we're looking at how to help our community in the ways that are going to impact their pocketbook the first, and help them to make some real meaningful change in their own lives, that energy efficiency is really where things start. So I guess I just wanted to ask if you have any presentations that are already available that maybe we can share out to the community. We're trying to not reinvent the wheel, and that's why I'm so appreciative that Board Member Smith brought you into this conversation so that we can use you as the great resource that you are. But I'm just wondering, as we are trying to offer those educational opportunities, what that process would look like. If you would, if there are pre-made things, or if it's something where we could invite you to be a speaker at some sort of a Zoom meeting that we record and make available to everyone online afterwards.
Well, these kinds of presentations are part of our bread and butter, so we're more than happy to do these as many times as you want. But you've got a good idea in that we could save some time if we just presented it asynchronously through some kind of a video. And I know that Colleen does a lot of that. She's videotaping some of her presentations, so they are available. So we're very flexible and can try to meet your needs depending on what segment of the population and what event and whatever that you're trying to reach them. So yeah, I'd be happy to try to work with you folks if you have a specific plan on how you want to get out to the community. And just regarding the financing for the residential programs, that's the real thing we want to address in this Green Bank initiative. And I am knocking on wood right now and telling you that I think there's going to be a bill introduced in the state legislature within the next month, not sooner, to create a statewide green bank. And there's already been legislation introduced in both the House and the Senate in D.C. to form a national green bank. And there would be a virtuous cycle between them because the national green bank could provide operating money to the state green bank. Representative Young voted for it both times when it was in the House. It never saw a hearing in the Senate yet, but it's now going to see a hearing in the Senate. So we're very hopeful that a national and state green bank could be formed, and we really want to get the education out to the public about those programs if it happens. And also, in the process of getting there, we're going to need support. We're going to need people to write their legislators and so on and say they support these ideas.
Yeah, thank you. That's kind of, I'll end on this. The last piece is advocacy. In our climate action planning efforts, as well as, as a board, when we're looking at things that we can do to make real change, it seems that often things are out of our hands where advocacy becomes the thing where we can say, yes, we vote for that, please do that. So whenever there are those opportunities, please just know that the City of Seward is eager to be a part of that. And if you'd like to reach out to ask for letters of support or for us to reach out to our congressman, I would be happy to disseminate that to the board.
Great, thank you. I will circle back on that for sure.
Awesome. Well, Chris, Colleen, thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to close out this hour and we're going to switch topics. Feel free to stay if you'd like. If not, thank you so much for being here. And hopefully we'll be speaking with you again soon.
Okay, thanks folks. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Jackie, thank you for your patience. Welcome. And now we are on to our second topic of the day. Look over my notes. Kind of having our initial brainstorming session for the SNCC overlay so that we can all have an opportunity to talk before we get together with P&Z so that our focus, or excuse me, our conversation can be a bit more focused at this one, and we can try to get some things done. I'll let you kick it off, Madam Planner. You can let me know what ideas you have, and then we can go to the board for ideas and suggestions.
So, if everybody remembers, you do have a couple new board members. We did a work session back in 2019 to discuss an overlay regarding the SMIC area. Currently in your guys' SMIC development plan, as well as mentioned in multiple, I think, priorities over the last couple of years, has been figuring out or considering to do an actual SMIC overlay, because right now, you look at the map and a lot of it is, well, all of it is industrial, right? But over the last 4.5 years plus, there have been a lot of questions and concerns on how to build out there, how to be able to effectively add housing. That's one big thing that right now is not allowed in an industrial area. And, we get it quite often. People wanting to, even businesses out there wanting to build bunk housing, wanting to build some, smaller apartments, and the feasibility of that. And, we've talked about at that work session, how do you go about it? How do we determine, and how do you as a board, as well as planning and zoning, determine whether we change the land use plan or you add a SMIC layer, so it'd be SMIC zoning specifically for the areas over at SMIC. I think that that's the direction at the end of that long work session that we had. Was one of the directions that I saw and took from that was, let's make it so, SMIC has its own ability to process and operate as the industrial portion, but to allow these different uses in, and how you want to see that laid out. You have a private individual over there that owns quite a large piece of property, but it's zoned industrial, and they've been asking for a couple of years now that how can we rezone, what can we do? And you look back at some studies that were done when they first started the development plan of SMIC. It was, how do we get businesses out there, not just marine businesses, but a convenience store, a restaurant, some type of housing. And that all comes down to, either changing the land use, but changing the land use for industrial would change how your Port Avenue works, right? Because that's all industrial. So, we went back and forth multiple times. And I think out of this meeting, the one coming up on the 16th with planning and zoning, my goal is to really sort of not only educate, but give you guys this report card, right? This report card of, how do you see SMIC? How does a new overlay work for SMIC? And, what do you guys see for the next 5-10 years? We know there's a lot of large things happening over the next 5-10 years, but how do you incorporate using that land to the best of its ability? And we talk a lot about SMIC, but we also need to talk about the bench over there, because there's been brought up by multiple council members to look into, developing a subdivision out there and how that would work. And so I think that, yes, we focus on SMIC, but an overall picture, like, where, if you guys if everybody agrees and says, yes, we want this overlay, but where do you see housing being able to be put? Because you know what happens over there. And so I think that work session will start us in a path of being able to produce a really workable plan overlay into your plan that you do your reviews on. And then, possibly move forward with that getting implemented and adding the SMIC overlay.
Yeah, it's such a big topic, and I feel quite overwhelmed by the whole thing, because I'm always afraid of unintended consequences, the best laid plans, and I know that so much good thinking went into making the land use plan. Like, there's really good reasons for having things separated the way that they are. And so I don't want to be flippant about just saying, oh, well, yeah, just, we don't want to just do whatever, but knowing where to start as someone who's not a planner, I think that myself personally, I have a lot of ideas for things that I think would enhance the industrial district, but I don't know how to lay it out in such a way where it makes the most sense. So I feel that the most I have to contribute is because I'm in the industry and because I'm over there almost every day, I see where improvement could be and where there's opportunities, but I think we're really leaning on planning and zoning and on community development to help to put those ideas in a way that makes sense for everyone.
And I think that with that, this first initial meeting, our goal is to have multiple meetings with you and your commission to discuss how this overlay could work. I think this first one is, like I said, it's giving you the tools, you as a commission and planning and zoning, taking what their strengths are and what your guys' strengths are and showing you how we merge those together, how we incorporate them, and how it becomes, yes, we have a really good land use plan, but that land use plan was how many years ago? It's yes, the land use, the changes that are needed, maybe we only did it to, we're like, oh, that's all industrial. But, you look at the study that was done for the SMIC development, and there were a lot of things that were requested to be over there. The ability to put things that, were not in the land use. They were just these, put a movie theater out there, put this out there. And so our goal is to take and give you guys the tools to work on it, and I will always be there to help. If you guys, my thought is we would not only just have these joint work sessions, but you guys would do your part on your side, we would be doing our part on our side, and then we would start merging them. So when we came together again, now we have sort of a little of an idea of a draft, and then we move from there. And it's a long, drawn-out process. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, and we need to put a lot of effort into deciding. But, and I keep going back to the housing issue. That is something that comes up every year, pretty much for me, probably every couple months. Like, how do I get the ability to add workers to my area over there? How do I, back that up? And can we put bunkhouses in? And we even went as far as approving a CUP, but that ended up not being able to be incorporated because of the building requirements, right? So when we do a SNC overlay, when you do any type of land use, we have to look at all those aspects. Are we going to restrict the use for someone? Because right now, the zoning code does restrict that ability for somebody to build an apartment over there. And, but my goal is, like I said, it's just an introduction to showing you guys where your strengths could be used to help us with this. I think that you guys have a lot of knowledge. You, Laura, that are over there all the time, and everybody else that is into that industry, but not maybe knowing the other side, the planning side that is involved with it.
No, one follow-up question for you, and I apologize if anyone's raising their hand. I have another screen on top of my Zoom screen. I'm looking at the land uses allowed table, and in the industrial zone, I show that one apartment is allowed outright, if I'm reading that correctly, and that a bunkhouse is a conditional use permit. Am I seeing that correctly? But you're saying that it doesn't really work out because of building requirements, people can't comply with what the requirements are there?
Well, it's the way that, a bunkhouse would work if they wanted to build it from the ground up, right? And meet those requirements. But we have so many people that are like, I want to build an apartment complex, a studio apartment. If somebody over there built a studio apartment, yes, that would be allowed. But, somebody that's wanting to put even in a 10-plex of studio apartments, it's not allowed in an industrial area.
Right. So, can you explain a little bit how an overlay works? Does an overlay make those uses, does it change it to outright, or does it change them to conditional, or do we get to choose when we make the overlay?
And that's part of how this meeting will go, and so this will help you. The one thing I need to do is I need to tell you guys that I keep getting kicked off the internet over here. It has to go back and forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you guys some stuff, but I think to keep me, because my computer keeps bouncing off, I'm going to take off the screen so I can make sure that you hear what I'm saying. So hopefully, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, see, my computer just shut down. But let me tell you how an overlay works.
Okay.
And hopefully I don't lose you guys on my laptop. The biggest part of how the overlay, and as far as even land use works, it's accomplished by a variety of goals, and they're prompted by recommendations or policies that are within our community, right? So we have a master plan. We have special studies that have been done over at SMIC. The goals related to the regulations, are to include how we, are going to deal with utilities, how, the land's leased over there, and are you going to use the same building height? I mean, over at SMIC, that's one thing that we discussed multiple times, right? Is SMIC has a different building height than Seward does. A lot of the buildings over there have variances. They don't even follow our definitions. I mean, we do that by doing a variance. So the whole overall meaning of a overlay district is to provide development regulations within a specified boundary. So they're special that lie on top of existing code. So existing zoning code, we take it and we look at it and we're like, okay, is that working for this area specifically? And then we keep it, but we add a code that, an overlay that would specifically only work for the SMIC area, and it may or may not match the boundaries of the underlying district, and that's where we fall into, right now everything's industrial. Maybe, you want to look at that bench portion. That bench portion is resource management, but maybe that resource management doesn't fit the criteria of that whole area, and maybe that overlay needs to be zoned into like R3 or R2, those abilities. And then in that overlay, we also would incorporate, and I just keep going back to the bench. We have a subdivision we have a subdivision code, but the overlay may reference, over on the bench, they're allowed to have septic, or they'll have wells because we can't get water and sewer to them. And so that overlay would give those development requirements that are needed within that. There's some things that, like really the review and answer portion, and again, this is going to be repeated at our next meeting, but how do the new standards guide the development? Is it going to make it so, we're meeting those goals that are in that original development plan? Or is it that maybe it's just too restrictive, or it's not restrictive enough, that, maybe we need to, you guys talk a lot about, the security of that area. Is it something that needs to be fenced off, and then the outer line areas be included for businesses, or, grocery store, convenience store, those type of things? I feel like I'm sort of rambling, so if I am, just wave at me and tell me to knock it off. But, and my goal with our work session is to really, I'll highlight the discussion topics that we did have at that 2019 meeting, like what I pulled from what, Carl and Bruce, what you as a board had recommended or discussed, as far as even the security and the fire department and how that all works in, and then having you guys take those things as well as the knowledge that you have. And like that report card is huge, right? That report card, it gives you like 5-6 different questions, and you're gonna read that report card, and then you're gonna give those areas of this possible SMIC overlay grade. And out of that grade, that's where we determine, did one of the questions get absolute A's out of it, and is that the direction we need to go, or do we just not meet those requirements, and 10 of us said that's an F, and how do we fix it type thing. So I'm really big on these type of report cards for zoning in general. It gives a better overview for anybody that's involved. We get your input, but we also get sort of an insight of where we want to see the direction. Maybe 6 of you guys think, nope, we don't need this, and it will show in the report card.
Gotcha. Board Member Paquette.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, does the master plan itself need to be looked at? And if so, should we be looking at that first before we start doing overlays over certain districts? And then I guess the next thing is more of a comment. It just, as I listen to this, and I'm not a planner, so I don't know anything about any of that, but it seems to me that we could define a business park, right, and make it so that there were the ability to have housing for the people that work in that business park. And the other comment or question I have is about the bench, because I keep thinking of the bench as a place that we would either put a solar farm or a wind farm or a combination of solar and wind, and so I have a question about what we want to do with the bench.
So I'll start with the first question. As far as the master plan, the whole purpose of not only our master plan but our comprehensive plan, right, is that planning and zoning does these reviews. but to make an overlay is really the first step of how the direction that you guys as a commission, planning zoning as a commission, and council as an overall wants to see that grow, wants to see what they want over there, right? Like how they see it in the next 20 years. So starting the overlay is exactly where we want to be. It consists of not only the goals and objectives, but the overlay helps with that long-term, like that long-term plan that, you know, you guys, I know you dive right into your guys' SMIC development plan, and, you know, I've seen the Excel spreadsheets. I know what you guys go through on that, but the whole purpose of it is to help with that long-term goal, the strategies that we need to use for the overall municipal comprehensive plan. And we do have a comprehensive plan, right? But it's to 2030. And I stress it constantly that is something that should, you know, it's to be reviewed about every year with planning and zoning. But every commission and every citizen needs to be reviewing it constantly, because 2030 isn't that far away. And to be honest, I mean, I don't want to be at 2029 going, oh, wait, we need to do our 2030 plan, you know, our 2040 plan. And so those are the topics, and that's how these overlays help us. And as far as answering the bench, you know, again, that's all something that can be incorporated in that SMIC side overlay. Do you want a solar farm? Do you want a wind farm? Do you want housing out there also? Like, how does that process work? Because right now, in an industrial area, you know, and that was one of the things that happened multiple times the night of our work session was, you know, people see what is in industrial over here on the Port Avenue side, and they see that, but they're like, wait a minute, we can't do that over at the SMIC side. You know, we can have the one apartment, but I've had people, you know, say, hey, what if I want to build in an industrial area and I want to put this, you know, big box apartment out there, and that overlay is going to help not only PACAD, but planning and zoning and anyone in the future.
Thanks, Jackie. I'm going to go to Carl first, because Carl, I know you have to hop off in just a few minutes.
Now, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I just want to thank Jackie for her efforts to update us on everything and the approach to solving some of the problems over at SMIC. I do have to leave, and that's basically I wanted to thank everybody, and I will see you all at the next board meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Board Member Jaffa?
Yeah, Jackie, you live in a head-spinning career. It's a massive activity in areas, and I really appreciate what it takes for you to actually wind up with a single plan. And that plan would be based on all the things, the components that you mentioned. And I would say that it's clear to me that we're going to have some split votes on this issue. If it's a really healthy issue, you get everything on the table, not everybody's going to agree, but that's healthy. And, you know, what we're actually seeking to do is establish what's good for the community, what uses in what areas, and we should have on the table everything, including, you know, topography and economics and emotional things, you know. So I think the next meeting, and do I assume that this meeting will be a joint planning and zoning and Port and Commerce Advisory Board meeting? Is that the next meeting?
Yeah.
I think we get everything on the table. That's my 2 cents worth. We get it all on the table and start working through the pieces.
We do have a joint work session coming up on March 16th. It will be via Zoom. I will, I will have all packets to you that Thursday before the meeting, so you guys can review and look at, and then, it is a head spinning area, right? And I know we can't make everybody happy, but we can address every.
You just lost you.
Turn your video off.
I think we lost you, Jackie.
While we are waiting for Jackie to reconnect, just wanted to make sure everyone got that date, March 16th, joint work session with P&Z.
What time is that?
I believe it's at 6 p.m.
Yeah.
It's the Tuesday right before your normal work session.
Right, it's them and us together, got it.
So, like I told Jackie earlier, it's kind of difficult for me sometimes to feel that I have the expertise going into these discussions to talk about, what is or isn't good for the community. I know there's a lot of health and safety issues. There's also a lot of issues with if you put housing in an industrial area, and then you have people living there, and there's industrial noise all the time, and it's not like, you deal with that kind of the health of the people who are eventually going to be living there. We want to make sure that if the city is allowing housing to go in, that it's in a place where people are going to be able to have a good quality of life. And so, I think about that a lot. JAG runs 24-hour shifts. I have not been out there at midnight recently, but I know that it's not the quietest environment. So, that's an issue with housing. Bunk houses for employees are one thing. Apartment buildings where you might be getting other people out there feels like another thing to me. People living in a bunk house have some sort of an expectation of it being a working environment. So, to me, it's really important that we don't have allowed uses out there that make some sort of a housing situation that is not good and healthy for people, or is not what they were expecting. But I think housing is also super important. I think short-term housing, especially for the marine trades, is really important out there. So I think, in my mind, a relaxing on the restrictions for more bunkhouse type things. Bunk houses, you can't have a bathroom in the unit. It's like shared restrooms with rooms with beds in them. It kind of separates things and makes it so that it's not an apartment building. It's not somewhere where families are coming to live necessarily. That being said, there are workers that have families. So, you have to balance those needs as well. Ben.
All right, thank you. I guess Jackie is probably the expert on this, but I'm not totally familiar with what bench area and who currently owns that. What uses, if any, are there? I don't think there's much. And how would that be an area that would be possible housing or like commercial?
Yeah, it sounds like that's kind of in play. Stephen, I saw you turned your video on. Did you want to respond to that?
Jackie's popping over to my office right now. She hasn't connected. She's back on the line.
She's here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, sorry guys. Internet hates me over there right now.
Yeah, no worries. So, Jackie, the question from Ben was just about what specific area you mean is the bench, and what uses are there now. And you said that there's been talk about subdivisions going in, but is that something that has been seriously considered? I think that's the gist of what he was asking.
So the bench right now is zoned resource management, and it has one house on it. So if you pull up a zoning map or of the SMIC area, and of course I don't have one in here.
Nope.
And you click on it, it's a very large area. It just shows City of Seward, and it goes along the road right above where the sawmill is.
Okay.
And like I said, there's one house out there, and it was brought forward multiple times to look into the possibility of putting housing out there, as well as creating multiple subdivisions.
Is that where that tract is for sale for like 1.7 million that's been, no.
No, that's across the street.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
The bench
Okay.
is on the east side of the road.
So this is the bench,
I see.
and there's
Okay.
this little house right there.
How did that get there?
It was all city property at one point, and then they did one replat, and this one house, before we replatted it as city property, he had purchased it from the state. So here's your bench area. The area that I was telling you that's privately owned is, of course, these two larger lots. And we do have water and things running through those properties, but it's, at one point it was even discussed, this campground that we call the 4th of July campground. At one point, previous administration had discussed the possibility of still having beach access, but taking that gravel lot and building an apartment building out there at one point. Like, there's been a lot of these different things thrown around over the last couple of years.
Yeah. And that, that just brings up a whole nother host of, I don't want to say issues, but considerations.
Issues.
That if you're putting in housing on that scale, it necessitates that you have other services out there. I think personally, if you're going to have a housing development, it would be nice to have, a place where someone can pop in and get a gallon of milk. That, I guess in Alaska, a lot of people don't have that option, but it does seem like that would be another good encouragement to allow other uses out there. That land that's privately owned, is that also resource management, or is that industrial?
This is all industrial.
Industrial.
I'm going to pop over to the zoning map. And just so everyone knows, there is an error in the zoning map, but I'm working on that right now, and we'll have new imagery that's from 2020 in it. So here's your zoning map of the area. So these are the lots that are owned by the private individual.
Gotcha.
And Bruce had mentioned, and we will make sure that we have topographical information also, as well as flood information, in the future for these meetings, because those are things that we have to take into effect when we're doing any type of planning.
Board Member Jaffa.
These are great maps, and it's a little hard to look at it on my phone and process all the information, and I am going to have to run. But these are, you're right, Laura. There's a lot to get your head around with this, and we're talking, like Jackie mentioned, 2030, 2040. We're trying to project the crystal ball on where the community needs are and what's good for the community. When John Anderson built that house, he proved how expensive it is to build along that bench. That's a tremendously technical aspect of water, sewage, and just the construction that's not cheap along there. And again, I'll throw out that I've seen a number of examples in my experience where valuable land has been used for the wrong purpose. And years down the road, people were sorry. Organic farms in the Green River Valley of Seattle were overlaid with these tremendous warehouses. People wish they had those organic farms back. So I think we really need to be careful, on not getting too far out without the data, without discussions with the community as a whole, and of course, bringing all that information into some sort of a usable piece of information for the council to make a decision about. But I'm going to have to run, guys, so I thank you so much for your time and the presentation. But that's it for me today.
Thank you, Bruce. Appreciate you making the time. So there's still 4 of us.
Thanks, Bruce.
Colby.
I too am going to have to go soon.
Okay.
I can stay for probably another 10 minutes, but I wanted to go back to your comments, Laura, about housing and noise and things like that. I think that as a community, we are desperate for housing and have been for as long as I've been working on PACAB and years prior to that. So I think if there's, and I also agree with what Bruce has been saying, that we need to get the entire community involved in what happens over there, because it is a must, I think, for the community to help decide. But if you live in a city and you choose to rent an apartment underneath of like in Chicago, under the L, you are deciding to live somewhere where there's noise. And I think that people may choose to live somewhere where there's noise so that they know they have year-round housing, as opposed to other things that happen here where they can maybe find something in the winter and then they're camping all summer, things like that. So I agree with you that having JAG doing 24-hour shifts, and people like my company, we're doing things that make loud noises there during the day. I think that people will have to ultimately make a decision if they'd like to live there or not. And I do agree also that bunkhouses, housing for some of these companies that work over there that have a difficult time in Seward. So that's my input. But I think it's a great conversation for this community, and whatever we do to help develop over there is going to make everything better on that side of the bay for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
But I can stay for I can stay till about 1:45, and then I've got to run.
Okay, so we'll wrap up. Norm, I just want to, my instinct, let me just let you know, my instinct when I see that, I didn't know that all of that land there was privately owned and industrial. And that got me excited, because you have Spring Creek as the boundary there, so that feels like almost a separate, it feels like kind of a separate area. Like, it's not as close to all of the industrial stuff that's happening, where housing development, to me, makes more sense right there. But what I don't want to get into is taking up industrial land and then we can't get it back. And so what I would like to know is, and this is moving forward, not today, but what are the plans for growing SMIC as an industrial facility? And is that land ever been a part of the conversation? Is that part of the plan? Because again, once we give it up, we're never going to get it back. Once it's housing, it's not going to be boatyards. I guess I'm just curious if that land if there have ever been plans for industrial uses for it, or what the plans have been. I guess if it's private land, it's not necessarily up to the city, but I'm just be curious to know if there have been conversations on how to use that in the past. And also if that private owner is the one interested in development, or if that's something that's even on the table with the current ownership. So
I'm pretty sure they're interested. It's all about the price. If the price is right.
Yeah.
I know they used to use part of that. They used to go across. They used to run the logs off the north dock and then run it down the road across before all the alders took over. So used to be pretty open, well, not quite all the way open, but I believe it's in the SMIC plan, development plan, which we're going to be working on again. Maybe we can add something in there, but it all depends on what the current people want to do with their land. If they want to sell it to a developer, and then it's all about zoning. So I guess it might start with zoning. So I think there's still a lot of work cut out for us over there, but I think we're on the right track by getting the overlay done and getting it kind of zoned for what we need to expand SMIC.
Right. My feeling is that if you were to put an overlay on that area and say, hey, you can now have it's R3, that the value of that land might go up significantly. That's just an instinct. I don't know, but it seems like people would jump on that opportunity. Yeah, Jackie.
So from the planning and zoning aspect, I've been asked multiple times by developers for those private parcels, and every time they ask about building larger housing complexes, and every time, because of the zoning, we have to tell them that it's not possible. And I think that has caused over the years why that hasn't sold, is because, you have somebody that's getting told, I want to build this big complex of apartments, and then we're saying, well, the only way you can do that is by changing code because it's not allowed, and they put a halt because they're like, okay, we're already going to put this money in, like now you want me to go and try to change it. And the direction of SMIC has always been, the industrial side, but that want and need of housing in general. You look at even just the prison. The prison, they flip switch, shifts, and they don't have a place. There's, I know of a couple that trade out their room, right? They only want a bed. They just want a bed. And so it's interesting, but I do think that by moving forward in the direction of doing the SMIC overlay will help answer those questions. Even like Bruce says, there's a lot of cost to possibly building on the bench, right? We know that. But there's also a lot of cost in, having a developer come in and say, hey, we really do see potential, and if we don't have it in our plan, resource management doesn't allow anything to be built in it. And so those are the ideas, or whether they're far-fetched or maybe it's something, we're discussing land use, municipal land use in general, and the council has some stuff in front of them regarding the ability to sell or lease. And, maybe it's down the road, but maybe the city says, yep, you know what, we want to sell a portion of this. So we want to subdivide it and we want to sell it. And let somebody, do the parts that they need. They figure out the watering and figure out the septic and all of that. Or we just sit and over the next, 20, 50 years, we still have this bench area that nobody's even thought about developing.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're creeping up on 1:45. Thank you guys for sticking around this long. Jackie, thanks for suggesting this. I think it was a really good opportunity to get the conversation started. I missed the last work session. I was out of town. So I'm actually probably going to go back and listen to that to get the history before we meet again. But this was very, very helpful. And I'm really excited about the meeting on March 16th. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think the next time that we meet together is for our regular scheduled meeting in March, which is on the 3rd, and then the 8th we have our joint work session with council, and then the 16th we have our joint work session with P&Z, and on the 17th we have our work session. So next month is a busy PACAB month, so I look forward to seeing you all more in the future.
Hey, Laura, real quick before everybody goes off.
Yeah.
Do you mind just sharing with the group that the content of that email I sent you?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Okay, I just wanted to let you guys know that the chamber has already requested their money back from the Alaska Ocean Cluster for the Blue Pipeline Initiative, and the city plans to do the same. There's a very thoughtfully written resolution and agenda statement going before council. At what meeting is that, Stephen?
It's the next meeting on the 22nd.
On the 22nd. So coming before council soon. So I wanted to let you all know that because there wasn't really time. It was a fast deadline. There wasn't time for it to come to the board for action, but Stephen really wanted everyone to know so that if you want to personally comment at that council meeting. But the plan is to take that money from the chamber and the city and to keep it set aside for a business advisor position for Seward, but that would be managed more locally so that we have a little bit more local control over making sure that comes to fruition. Yeah, Linda.
I just want to say I approve of all of that. Definitely.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm excited. I was so excited for the Blue Pipeline, and I'm really sad that it didn't end up being what we wanted it to be, but I think that there's still good momentum and a lot of people that want to see that here in Seward, so I think we're going to make something great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Laura.
All right, thanks for the reminder, Stephen. All right, you guys, have a great day.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Goodbye.
Between